Okay, so as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, I just did a light novel in like a day. And it was an interesting and enriching experience, and I want to talk about it somewhat here. Obviously, I talked a lot about the experience of writing the light novel in the light novel because it was a meta clusterfuck that mostly was about itself. And pretty much what it turned out to be. The product was entirely the result of the circumstances of its creation, which is that it had to be written in less than a week and it had to reach 40,000 words. And the quality was completely inconsequential to me. All that mattered was that it hit the word count within the time limit, which was especially difficult because I chose a really busy time to try and do it, where I was trying to get out this emotional anime raps album, figuring out where I'm moving to, like helping to clean up the house, moving out Ben, who just took off yesterday, had all these other podcasts to do, so it was a really difficult time to try and take on this challenge. Really, I'd say it was like 3.5 or 4 days that I spent writing it, but I'd say the total amount of time that I spent writing was probably close to 24 hours. So maybe less. Yeah, probably a little bit less than 24 hours of actual writing time in between 3 or 4 days. And yeah, again, everything about it was just this struggle to have enough to say, because the book's kind of divided into two halves. There's manic, insane metafiction, and then there's like a podcast about the nature of writing a book and my whole history with fiction writing and all these like inner conflicts I feel as I'm writing it, both of which were interesting in their own ways for what they said to me. Like what I gained from them, and each was equally hard, because the fiction segments I had to come up with ideas and like have something to write about, because there's no prep time for this. It was like, let's hit the ground running, we gotta write a book. I couldn't sit around, like a lot of people were saying, well, not a lot, but a few people were like, well, you should have just wrote like a light novel. Like, I expected this to actually have like characters and a story, and I'm like, you realize I would have had to plan that. Like, there's no way I could have just done that off the top of my head and kept having ideas to progress the story further. I'd have to at least have a layout of the scenes and stuff like that. Like, the last time I wrote a book, back in 2010, while the actual writing time was comparable to this, like, I wrote 25,000 words in a day at the very end of the month that I wrote it in, but I had it all planned extensively, like for a year, so I knew exactly what had to happen. It was just a matter of getting the characters from point A to point B, which is probably more like how the, light novel authors would write. And even if I had like a month to write this, that would have been more than enough time to create something like that. But doing it in a week while also having all this other stuff going on, there was just no way. So it was just a matter of like, what can I come up with? So when the fiction bits, it's just like, if I have ideas, I can write. But they tend to end quickly because they're not very complicated ideas. It's like a very quick little thing I just jumped into, and then it just kind of runs its course and it's over. And then the other sections were hard because all I'm doing is writing this book. Like, I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not trying to do anything else. So, like, coming up with, like, far-flung things to talk about, or, like, sharing what's going on with me right now, nothing was going on with me right now. I'm writing this book, So I ended up going on this whole exploration of like all my past work and stuff like that, and even that didn't end up taking up enough time. I'm kind of trained in trying to write succinctly, so trying to stretch the stuff out made it even more difficult, as I talk about in the book. But in spite of all those limitations, and also the fact that the audiobook is extremely affected by the time constraints, because it had to be entirely done like that day. The day that it released is when that morning I finished recording it, and then that night I edited it, and I just didn't have enough time to edit the whole thing well. Like, the whole first hour, I just cut out all stops, like all breaths, all stops, and it just flows nonstop, and it's like headache-inducing. Then the second 2 hours have like barely any editing. I just cut out mistakes and long pauses, and so those feel like really drawn out and weird, and podcasty and stuff. So yeah, the whole thing's a clusterfuck as a result of the time it took to write it. But on the other hand, for what it is, it was actually really interesting and impressive, I guess, even to myself. I didn't expect it to have as much intrigue as it did have, and it sort of reminded me what my strengths and weaknesses are as a writer, as well as like kind of inspired me to want to write more fiction, because I kind of came to terms with a lot of old things. In a way, it's similar to the old ass anime cast, like how in those videos I sort of, take something that's been niggling at the back of my mind for all these years and put it to bed. That's how it felt with this book. Like, as I was going through all my old fiction writing and, like, analyzing what my style was like back then, like, talking about all these unfinished stories and, like, explaining them, and it kind of felt like the weight was off of my shoulders, finally, for all those things. And like, I could move on. Because I feel like part of why I haven't been able to write fiction for the last few years. And yeah, bear in mind, this was the other limitation, other than the fact that it's a 1 week time span, is the fact that I don't write fiction. This is literally not what I do. I haven't written any fiction in years. I never, like, completed a story. I've never been, like, a big fiction writer. So that was a challenge in itself, just, like, remembering what it's like to write fiction at all, for the parts of it that actually are fiction. And I want to make a note here that, like, a lot of even the supposedly non-fictional parts are kind of bullshit. Like, some of them where I'm, like, waxing philosophical about some idea are just something I thought up and aren't really how I feel about things. Because I've had a few comments reacting to certain sections that are, like, questionable, and I was like, it's not real. It's just, like, what I thought would be interesting to talk about. So, there's sort of a balancing act. This thing rides all over the line between reality and fiction, just constantly. But the realist parts, like where I'm going through my old notebooks and just, like, literally reading out old sections of stuff, it allowed me to come to terms with a lot of things. And, I remembered that, which I'd completely forgotten that I used to write a lot of flash fiction, which flash fiction is where you try to write, like, a story in 50 words or like, 50 to 100 to 500 words, like just these super short stories. And I wrote a lot of those because I'm a lot better at that than I am at coming up with a full narrative. I'm better at just, like, making something that sounds cool and gets an idea out really quick, and then it's over. And doing that was the most fun I had with this book. Like, that's the parts where I felt like it kind of shined. The early chapters, definitely, it's like trying to find its footing with just going, like, ballistic with the meta and just being all over the place and just, like, a constant stream of funny sounding words, But then as it goes, those get better and better. Like, the first hour or so is just chaos. But then when you get back to the fiction sections later on, when you get to, like, the Swamp Sister story and the one about the guy who plays Yu-Gi-Oh so well that anyone will sleep with him, Damien Burger Sandwich, and the 4 flash fictions that I got from Twitter at the end, all of those are, like, way better written and constructed, and they're, like, these tight little narratives that I was actually really happy with, and I felt like, wow, I could do this all the time. This is a lot of fun. The Twitter ones in particular were so good that I had to stop because I was putting too much effort into them. And I was just, like, trying to get the last 7,000 words of the book done. And I'm, like, writing these tightly constructed little short stories. And I was like, this is not good. This is not where this is supposed to be going. So yeah, I reminded myself that, like, maybe it doesn't always have to be a book that you write. Like, fiction doesn't have to be literally writing a fucking 50,000 word novel. And it doesn't have to be exploring these big ideas. I could write shorts. Maybe some of those big ideas could become shorts. Who knows? So it definitely gave me a jolt of inspiration, helped me to get over a lot of things. So much could be done with a little bit more time. And I was really glad, like, I didn't know what to expect from the reaction to this, because, like, the thing about this book is that this is totally an unguarded stream of conscious. Like, this is not like the stuff I usually present on the internet. This feels like something I would have written back when I wrote fiction, because it used to be that my blog posts and stuff were, like, just ideas flying out of my brain as fast as they could, and they were often abrasive and edgy and sexual and violent and insane and meta, and, like, that's all stuff I've kind of curbed out of my writing over the years, all stuff I've tried to put to the back because it's embarrassing, and when it's not done well, then it looks like shit, And so it was almost nerve-wracking to publish this thing that I realized, like, this is, this is not what people know me for. I'm used to more careful, measured, written analysis, or even my vlogs. I think about them before I record them, And granted, this was the time to do it, if any time, to, like, let loose, is that more and more people know me for my vlogs, more and more people know me for my music, which is very emotionally unguarded, so, like, if there was a time that I felt like people would get where this was coming from, it would be now. Like, imagine this before Digibro After Dark, before that was a thing, if you'd only seen my main channel and you just jumped into this, you'd be like, what the fuck is happening? I mean, you probably were like that anyways, but, it made more sense, and there was enough of the audience that, like, got it. All these comparisons I was getting to, like, all these postmodern authors, like, William S. Burroughs and David Foster Wallace and fucking, just, like, all the James Joyce, like, all these people that I'm like, yeah, that's exactly who I want to be compared to. Thank you. People calling me the Weeaboo Joyce. I'm like, yes, awesome. And, like, the idea that people get that, and that so many people finished this fucking thing, I could not believe that. There's a lot of people telling me, like, yeah, I finished the book, I really enjoyed it. I made it through this gauntlet of bullshit. I expected this to get, like, 2,000 views at the most. It's got, like, 20,000 views. It's almost terrifying, and the response has been much more positive than I expected. I mean, the fact that there's a few people who are like, your writing style is pretty good. I just really wish you'd tighten it up or skip this or that. And I'm like, you don't understand. That's an extreme compliment because this was written in a day and defined by its limitations. So if you think it could have been good just by changing some things and having more time, that's an extremely high compliment to the story. And the fact that there's people who enjoyed it anyways, lots of people telling me, like, I'd buy this, I'd get a physical copy. Fan art of some of my stupid ass characters. That's incredible. So I'm just looking at this like, man, what could I do if I had a little bit more time? Like, if people responded this well to a story I wrote in a fucking day that's, like, abjectly horrible, then, what if I did one that's not? And there doesn't need to be another one like this. This is fully explored the pure, unhinged, meta insanity genre. I could write shorts that are in the vein of this, or, longer stories that are more focused and have any kind of narrative to them whatsoever. But yeah, this is just a postmodern nightmare. But it was influential, inspirational. It made me want to do more, like to try and get back to it now that I've sort of put it all behind me and, like, examined it and gone, wow, I could write before, and figuring it out over the course of the book, like, figuring out which things I wanted to write and which things I didn't, and what stuff was funny and what stuff wasn't funny, and, like, really coming to terms with what my writing had been before, and, like, tracing this lineage of, like, okay, this is what it was back then, this is what it is now. I can see how it came to this. I can see how I've made this development. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is that it established a narrative of me as a fiction writer, which didn't exist before to me. It was something that existed back in 2011 and hasn't really since, where I look back at my old writing and I don't have the sensation of, like, this came from me, like, I mean, I understand it and stuff. Like, the last thing I wrote that I'm in any way proud of is Cyrano and Purple Steve from 2011, which, if you haven't read that, I'll put a link in the description. I actually really like it still, but it's only, like, 14 or 15 chapters, and then it kind of abruptly ends. But you can definitely see what, like, that story is the closest to what if I tried to do long-form writing today, what it would look like, which is each chapter is kind of short and, like, a self-contained story, but it continues this narrative of, like, it's like each chapter is, like, one step further in this adventure, but while telling its own little story. That's what my long-form fiction writing would probably look like, but, like, that's from 2011, and there hasn't been shit since. So looking back at it, it's like, where do I go from here? And then putting it all out there in this book was like, okay, now I get it. Now it's all behind me. I've looked at it, I've consolidated it, I understand it, and now we can move on, and we could do a new thing, if I feel like it. So, yeah, thanks to everybody who actually listened to it or read it. I'm glad you liked it. If you did, shocking, incredible to think so. Anyway, while I'm here, I'm gonna read a letter because I ended the DigiDoes mail segment because I'm moving soon. But I went back to check the P.O. box just to see if there's any letters I missed, and there was one sent to Digibro After Dark. So let's see what's in here. It's really tiny. There is an ABBA album cover. It says, songs include Thank You for the Music, Dancing Queen, Knowing Me, Knowing You, Mamma Mia. It's handwritten track list on the back. And then there's a paper that says ABBA on it, and on the back it says, Dear Digibro After Dark, I want you to listening to ABBA songs. I like to see you are singing and dancing to their songs. ABBA is great pop group from Stockholm. We send you an album so you can pick any songs what you like. We wish you a thank you for the music. From Steven from Toronto. ABBA. Well, I guess I'll go listen to ABBA.